Good morning, everybody. I'm Allan Marks, partner at Milbank, and today we're going to focus on Florida, but in particular on Greater Miami, where 2.7 million people or so are sitting in harm's way with the impacts of climate change. We've got some pretty impressive experts to talk to us about the situation, about some of the unique challenges that the Miami area has, and also some of the innovative approaches they're taking to make the area both more sustainable and more resilient, in particular looking at infrastructure. So with that, I'd like to have each of you please introduce yourself, and then we'll kick it off. Christian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Allan, and hey, everybody. Appreciate being here. So my name is Christian Kamarath. I work for Miami-Dade County's Office of Resilience as part of our adaptation program. I'll get more into that, but basically we look a lot about the impacts and risks of sea level rise on multiple types of infrastructure. And we do a lot of planning and coordination, education, and policy, both within our departments, across departments, and with external stakeholders. So anyway, thanks for having me.
Good. Okay, thanks, Christian. Marta?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Marta Morello. I work in the Office of Resilience of Miami-Dade County, together with Christian. Unlike Christian, I work on the mitigation team. So we focus a lot on the causes of climate change and how to reduce greenhouse gases emissions through a variety of programs and policies to reduce energy consumption, water consumption, increase the use of electric vehicles across our fleet, and also increase the use.
Good. Okay, thank you, Marta. And Nelson?
Hi, my name is Nelson Peretacome. Can you all hear me fine?
Yes, just fine.
Perfect. So my name is Nelson Peretacome. I'm the city engineer for Miami Beach. I'm in charge of the capital program, the water, the sewer, the stormwater, and resilience neighborhood projects, as well as the permitting for right-of-way management, the GIS, and the survey staff that support the infrastructure program, as well as the ongoing business of the city.
Good. Thank you, Nelson. And Chris, over to you at Miami Tunnel. Can't hear you. Chris, while you can work with Ken to fix your audio, I'll tell you that is Chris Hodgkins, the CEO of the Miami Access Tunnel, a project I had the pleasure of working on for the original construction financing, which connects downtown Miami to the Port of Miami, which is on an island in the bay. Why don't we start with the first, I just want to put this in context and look at how Miami and Greater Miami-Dade County face some pretty unique geophysical challenges in dealing with the impacts. And I think today we'll look at a lot of infrastructure today. We'll look at transportation and energy, but I want to focus on water with each of you, because there are really at least three ways where water will be the key to this conversation. One will be the obvious impacts of sea level rise and inundation, especially coastal inundation during high tides. Second will be the impact of the rising water table that makes it a greater challenge to drain away rain when it floods in freshwater from even interior areas of the county, not just along the beach. And the last would be saltwater inundation of the aquifer from which many or most of the population of Miami-Dade County receive their drinking water, and that actually may be a more urgent issue in matters of decades, not longer than, say, even sea level rise, which gets more of the press. So Marta, can we start with you by looking at some of the unique geophysical characteristics that you're facing?
Yeah, of course. South Florida and Miami-Dade County is a unique spot, and it's surrounded by water. You have the Atlantic Ocean on one side, and then the Florida Keys and more water, and in the south, and then there's the Everglades National Park to the west. And so effectively the area is surrounded by water, and what is unique is the limestone ground, because the porous limestone creates challenges because it means that water can rise from underneath. And so, certain solutions that other places have adopted, nationally and internationally, will not work in Miami because the water will just come from underneath or go around, and there's essentially no way to bring that up. And another geophysical characteristic is the ridge. So while a lot of the area is low-lying, so the average elevation of Florida is of Miami-Dade County is 7 feet. So if you stand up and raise your hand, that's about the average elevation. And so there's one area, which is the ridge, which is where some of the light rail is located. With keeping this in mind.
Good. So, Christian, let's turn to you. I know Miami-Dade County has put out some impressive reports. The 2016 final report was, I think, especially comprehensive. I know you're working with RAND Corporation, which has done some good studies, partnering with folks in the Netherlands to look at innovative, seawall approaches. Although noting what Marta said about porous limestone, that may or may not work. What are some of the programs that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, sure. And what Marta was describing is actually a part of a whole chapter in one of our most recent publications, which is our countywide sea level rise strategy. So looking across, this huge area that hosts home to 2.7 million residents, we outline sort of the history of living with water, how we've adapted our landscape, and now it's a very highly managed sort of regional water infrastructure drainage system. But that sea level rise strategy also talks about sort of general approaches we can take to adapt to sea level rise that, makes sense in South Florida. So we talk a lot about building on high ground around transit, which achieves sort of multiple benefits. We talk about building like the Keys. So Marta mentioned the Florida Keys, and sort of the iconic pictures of that include these houses that are built up on stilts or pilings, several feet off the ground, to allow water to flow and go underneath during sort of storm or high tide events. But we also talk a lot about green and blue infrastructure and incorporating that both linearly along greenways and blueways, as well as in smaller spaces, whether it's in yards or parking lots, to have more pervious or green infrastructure to help with that the filtration and the water quality and quantity management on site. So our sea level rise strategy, I'll make sure I include a link in there. It also outlines 10 key actions that the county is taking, both from a policy and sort of regulation and project standpoint, and then a number of funded and unfunded projects, as well as regional projects. There's so much that goes on in South Florida, and knowing water and how it moves, you can't really just narrow to one street or one neighborhood. You often have to look at a network or a broader scale, whether it's at a watershed or regional scale. So that's one of the main driving forces behind our team's work, and was created in partnership with many folks. So it's really a coordination piece with other state agencies like South Florida Water Management District, especially, to make sure we're making those investments today that will be paying off in the decades to come.
So, Nelson, in light of what Christian just mentioned, you're in the city of Miami Beach. You really are on the front line. And I remember as a kid when I would sit on the beach and dig a little trench in a sandcastle, the seawater would come in when the tide was coming in with a wave, and the front part of my barrier was not too bad, but it would come around the back and erode it. And in Miami Beach, with high tides, you have a lot more inundation on the part that actually faces the mainland across the waterway as opposed to facing the ocean. How are you making your city's infrastructure both more resilient to itself and to contribute to the resilience of the bigger community?
Yep. So when I speak about stormwater infrastructure, there's actually really three methods to stop flooding. It's not just one answer that fits all. So there's three types of flooding. There is tidal flooding, and we raise elevations to prevent tidal and chronic sea level rise flooding. So that's raising the roadways, building like the Keys, which someone just mentioned, things of that nature. There's storm surge flooding, which what we do there is we build up seawall to prevent that overland flooding. And really they only work to a certain elevation, because from the models that we've done, the slosh models for overland flooding, it says that a Category 5 would be about 18 feet of water over Miami Beach. Obviously, we can't build an 18-foot wall, given the fact that most of Miami Beach is at about 3.0 NAVD. And then we build pipes and pumps to prevent rainfall flooding. So stormwater management systems, to a lesser extent in previous years, we did gravity systems, but those are no longer effective due to the boundary conditions that the high tides impose on our stormwater systems. All those things holistically will make our infrastructure resilient and attenuate flooding within the beach. One other thing we've done is we've also implemented private side yard drains. So when we come in, and because we realize that something that if we're elevating in a neighborhood, there might be properties that might be elevated already to prevent that tidal flooding, but there are properties that are still low lying. So one of our lessons learned from our programs, we're implementing private side yard drains and allowing them to connect to our stormwater management system to drain any standing water that might be caught on those private properties. And so those private properties either the owner adapts them or they get sold and they get adapted. We really see that this is going to be part of a 30-year cycle. We're thinking that this will match the mortgage cycle, which is about 30 years, which is conveniently the same amount of years that we design a roadway for. So it tends to align, and we're hoping that in 30 years we'd be in large portions of neighborhoods would have already adapted, given the fact that we're encouraging them to adapt by adapting the public rights of way.
That's great. Thanks, Nelson. Chris, let me see if we have your audio back. Right, we still don't. Okay, I'm gonna ask if Ken could help fix Chris's audio. I'd love to hear what we're gonna do with the Miami tunnel as well.
Working on it, Allan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Marta, let's circle back with you for a second. You know, a lot of what you're talking about earlier is resilience, and a lot of what your agency is focused on is also sustainability. To what extent are the limited resources available for this being, or will they be diverted potentially from sustainability to resilience? In other words, from things that prevent impact, prevent greenhouse gas emissions and contribute to a more sustainable society, and instead now have to go to hardening infrastructure to make it survive the impacts that are already happening?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's always hard to balance the two things, you know, and it's very location dependent. And what I can say is that a lot of the focus now is on the adaptation and how to harden infrastructure and adapt and prepare for these events that we see on a regular basis, you know, in where we live. So in fact, we, you know, it's kind of a struggle to bring up and highlight the importance of sustainability, because you know, the more resilient infrastructure and energy efficiency that you integrate into design and the construction and the operation, you know, the less you will have adapted to the future. And so it's this very you know, hard balance that and game that you have to play. And so we try to work very closely with other departments and with the adaptation team to look at the different projects that come on our desks and ensure that both things are present, and explain some of the you know, some of the pros and cons, and you know, and trying to really bring all aspects of climate change onto the table.
And Christian, following up on what Marta just mentioned, from a collaboration standpoint, how do you see sustainability and resilience issues being played out, not just, you know, within, you know, greater Miami, but also with the state of Florida, with the federal government? You mentioned the South Florida Water District. There's a lot of different pieces to this puzzle. How do they play together in the sandbox?
Yeah, I want to just going off of Marta's points too, it's sort of a metaphor we hear often, and I know local community-based organizations and activists use this a lot too, which is to say, If you have a faucet running in the bathroom, whether it's the sink or the tub, and it's overflowing and it's flooding, you can bring in a pump or more mops to clean it up. But if you don't turn off the faucet in the first place, you're sort of just, putting money down the hole. And obviously, we know a certain amount of adaptation and so on is needed because a certain amount of sea level rise and other effects are sort of baked into the system, and we want to find co-benefits so that we're being adaptable over time. But I would say in terms of collaboration, the state and federal level, I think it depends on there's these competing goals and interests, and from the adaptation side, we're thankful and excited. There's been a resurgence of state support for flooding and sea level rise resiliency, and we've actually spending the last several weeks putting in a bunch of grant applications for the Resilient Florida program. There's about $500 million available statewide coming from American Rescue Plan Act, and so that also takes talking with our regional partners like this South Florida Water Management District, because while we might want to do some drainage improvements in a certain neighborhood we know is vulnerable, it's part of a larger canal basin that is managed by the district. And so we work together on the grant proposals to make sure that they are complementary and aligned, so that if one or both get funded, we're helping meet each other's goals in that way, just at different scales, right? So I think it is a question of scales. And in a lot of ways, we work closely with our municipalities. The county has to think sort of big picture, but we also look really closely on a regional scale as far as the Southeast Florida Climate Change Compact goes. It's been a really successful collaboration amongst 4 counties in Southeast Florida, along with municipalities, to look at how are we advocating for ourselves in Congress and lobbying for the investments and programs we need from the federal government. And that's been really important. I think, 15, 20 years ago, folks were going up to DC or even to Tallahassee by themselves asking for help. But when you kind of came together as a region and align our goals and create a vision for moving forward, then it becomes compelling and we get a better chance at receiving, more assistance from different levels.
Good. And staying on that topic, if we go to I'm going to look at the other end of it. If you're in Miami Beach, Nelson, what's your take on collaboration and whether it's how effective it is in helping your city cope?
Well, we definitely we know collaboration is an absolute must if we're going to really be able to adapt to climate change. The thing about Miami Beach is that it's a bit unique. It's a barrier island. It's a little bit off on its own from Miami-Dade County. So some of the things that apply to Miami-Dade County, like the Army Corps' back-bay study, don't really, they don't move the needle for us. So we do need to have our own adaptation independent, but regional issues such as the Biscayne Bay and protecting the bay while we're handling all these resilient infrastructure solutions. So making sure we don't put contaminants in the bay, making sure that we limit the amount of nutrients going into the bay that really affect the overall economy and the viability of the region as a whole. For the long term, those really are regional issues. In fact, we've commissioned studies that look at the region overall in terms of its nutrient loading into the bay. And what we've realized is that without everyone coming together, Miami Beach does not move the needle. We contribute a fraction of the nutrients going into the bay. Things such as the canals coming from not only from the county but up north, because the watershed for the canals goes as far as Lake Okeechobee in the central part of the state. If we don't tackle that as a group, I don't know that there would be an adequate solution. And in terms of adaptation, obviously coordinating and making sure that we try to limit any impact we have on the bay, where we want to be the best partners possible. And to that end, we've implemented 5 stages of treatment in what we're referring to them no longer as pump stations, but as stormwater treatment systems, because it has 5 stages of treatment prior to disposal via outfall into the bay. So it's both individual and regional, the solutions coming together.
Okay, thank you, Nelson. Chris?
Hey, can you hear me now?
We can. That's wonderful. That's great.
Hey.
It's funny. It took many years for us to get the Miami Tunnel financed and under construction to begin with. So I know you can overcome any technological challenge.
listen, it was easier to do a resilient tunnel than it was to try to hook up on this webinar.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, welcome.
Thank you,
welcome.
Allan. And we appreciate your work on the tunnel and one of the first P3 projects in the state of Florida. But one thing the $1 billion tunnel was the first resilient project in the state of Florida. Not an easy thing at a time when back in 2010, we really weren't allowed to say the word climate change. So we put together a tunnel, an infrastructure project that took into consideration sea level rise. Now we did that because it was a smart thing. And when you have a tunnel that you're financed over 35 years, you need to make sure that you're going to ensure the integrity of that tunnel and ensure your asset. And when you have to insure your asset that's underwater, 120 feet below sea level, you need to make sure that you're going to protect yourself from sea level rise. So when we built the tunnel, we call it the resilient tunnel because we built these 55-ton metal gates at every end of the tunnel that when the Coast Guard captain declares code Yankee, we take 27 minutes on each portal on both entrances, and we lower the gates. 55-ton metal gates that are lowered into place with a rubber gasket. So as the water pressure gets higher on the outside of the tunnel, the gasket gets tighter to keep it watertight. Now, we did that because where's the port? Right at sea level. So we had to do it. But we also had to do it because we couldn't build the tunnel if we couldn't insure the asset. So it was an economic decision as well as it was an environmental decision. But what it did is it made us the first major infrastructure project in Florida that took sea level rise into consideration. And now that's part of our ESG corporate-wide. But we're proud to be part of looking at what the solution is to infrastructure in taking the environment and sea level rise into consideration. So that's how we built the tunnel and looking at all those issues that we're going to face. And, we've looked at smart cities and climate change action and all of that. And now Meridian, which is the company I work for, we're doing the resilient grants for the Rockefeller Foundation around the world. We're administering them because it's important for us, and it's part of every project that we look at now. But it's an economic decision, I think, will make people realize this is the smart thing to do.
Good. Thank you, Chris. Christian, if I want to piggyback on some of that because Chris is right. This P3 model, because it's based on availability payments, really created economic incentive for the owner of the infrastructure project, or I should say the operator, the concessionaire, to build resilience in from day one in order to reduce the life cycle cost of the project, make sure it's insurable, preserve their economics, and as a result, make sure that that service would remain available, notwithstanding, what was already predicted for climate change impacts in the future. Are P3 models or other models being considered as part of this policy, toolkit in order to encourage more resilient infrastructure in the future?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on which infrastructure system or type you're talking about. I think, and this is a little kind of adjacent topic, but when we think about housing as a piece of infrastructure that we're really concerned about, and of course the affordability of housing, that's where we see and really rely on leveraging private investment, private developers to, make an investment and create a development that is going to return a profit both for them, but also include, a certain percentage of units that are affordable to help, the working class and other low-income folks be able to afford to live in a place that allows them to get to jobs, schools, and so forth. So, that's I know an issue that many large metro areas are struggling with maintaining and increasing the affordability and quality of housing. We have a lot of older housing units that are sort of in their redevelopment process, and the good news is we have county mayor now, Danilo Vinkava, who's really putting issues of infrastructure, wanting to take advantage of future federal funds and these large infrastructure packages and deals coming down from the federal government to really make up for what has been some lost time and investment in things like affordable housing. So yeah, I think there's probably a lot even more room for working P3s and other collaborations. I think honestly, some of the mechanisms and ways we set up deals to finance these things as we incorporate climate risk into them more, some of them probably haven't been invented yet. And we're really looking to private sector and other entrepreneurs to help us think more creatively about financing, because some of the older models, I think that, maybe rely on pure property values growing over time. Those aren't necessarily going to work with an accelerating risk like flooding and sea level rise in Miami. So it's a little daunting on the one hand, but I'm hopeful with new thinking coming online every day, every year, that there are new ways of financing doing these kind of projects.
And let's look at that for a second. One last piece you mentioned, which is housing prices going up, housing supply going up, housing demand going up. I mean, the greater Miami adds around 300,000 people every time we roll out a new decennial census. At some point, Nelson, you mentioned challenges to viability before. That's livability. That's the ability for people to, as human society, to function and thrive in an urban area in a certain place. When you look at your forecast and your models and impacts, at what point do you assume that population stops growing, perhaps in part because of the physical and economic challenges, raised by some of these challenges?
But I think that's an excellent question. I think it's a two-part question. Really, we look at obviously at population and population projections when we do a master planning. Now, population may not stop growing, but the demands may either kind of stagnate or go downwards. For example, we use less water today than we did 20 years ago. We produce less wastewater flows than we did 20 years ago. Now, granted, there's other aggravating factors. If you have too much infiltration into your sanitary sewer system, then your flows are still going to stay high, but your water demands are going to be relatively lower. In terms of housing projections in Miami, from everything that I can tell, housing demand is extremely strong. Supply is not meeting demand, and particularly in the suburban areas, less condos, more houses with yards, especially across the Bay. I mean, Miami Beach does have some, but across the Bay, there's a lot of demand for those houses. Prices are going through the roof, and we're seeing a lot of folks coming in from other areas. So a lot of our growth is not only organic, but it comes from people moving to Miami. So when it comes to planning for infrastructure, we need to take all these things into account. And kind of to your point earlier, it might not be just the public sector solution, but the private sector as well. So what we did in North Beach, which is an area that has a relatively low AMI, average median income, compared to other areas of Miami Beach, we created a community, a CRA, a community redevelopment authority, and we're looking for private sector solutions to help fund the neighborhood improvement program that's gonna improve the entirety of the North Beach Town Center. So this is actually just in its infancy. We haven't really explored these, but we're entertaining how do we make sure that we coordinate with the developers. There's a lot of developers in the area right now. How do we make sure we coordinate with the developers? Who goes first, who goes second in terms of elevating, and how can we incentivize these developers to as they're building infrastructure, essentially, how do we incentivize them to make it as resilient as possible for the benefit of the entire neighborhood?
So, Nelson, thanks for that. Marta, there's I'm seeing us drive. I've used this analogy in other contexts, but we're kind of driving at some point with our feet firmly planted hard on both the brake and the gas pedal at the same time. If you look at land use and you look at this urban sprawl and the impacts of single family homes with yards that Nelson mentioned and the impacts that has, it increases the need to, for freshwater drainage, for example, in the inland suburban areas, and contrast that to the land use patterns that you mentioned to encourage, as a matter of public policy, transit-oriented development, especially near transit lines that are in elevated areas on the ridge. Those two seem to be kind of different. Is it the market working opposite public policy, or is it more complicated?
Yeah, I mean, like in the county's comprehensive development master plan, which is kind of the document that really looks at the different elements in the life of the county. The land use in particular. We know that as local government, as a community, we need to strive for those. To develop the urban infill area and move towards build towards where the transit is, and also allow for like higher density. So I think that there is a lot of movement to going from this like high level goals into kind of like operationalize it, even in the review for projects and the recommendations that get moved to the board of county commissioners. We take into consideration all of these guidelines, and there are a lot of items related to climate change, both adaptation and mitigation in the land use element that guide these decisions. And then another one, related to what Nelson was saying, is also the cost of providing for the county to provide services to these new developments. And that's where you see, a lot of push to build in the urban areas, to build in higher density, to build like close to transit, to really ensure that the county can serve the community. So it's a struggle.
Chris, looking at the port, we've had a little bit of a test case with the pandemic and the impact that had, with the rapid drop in demand, obviously for cruise ships for a period, and also for cargo. And now we're seeing challenges globally on supply chains and port logistics. And we're talking about, transitions to electric trucks, which would, change the kinds of vehicles you have coming into the port potentially, and put new demands on port infrastructure. And you're seeing in the middle, this link, the tunnel. What lessons can we learn from that might be applicable to the longer term climate trends?
Well, I think that there's a lot of things that the port is planning to do to try to address some, of the sustainability issues and climate change issues. They'll be looking at electric vehicles. We're looking at trying to facilitate more transportation opportunities for people to get to the port, to and from the port, using the tunnel. We're looking at a whole project that we have on the port now called COOL, which is CO2 lowered. We've done a lot at the port, and we have the major initiative, our COOL initiative, coming up, where we're looking at shore power, we're looking at LNG, we're looking at anything that we can do to try to put Port Miami as one of the top 10 sustainable ports in the nation. But we're hoping to rebound. Right now, we have record cargo this past year, 1.2 million TEUs, higher than it's ever been in the history of the port. And slowly and surely, we see the return of cruising. But we've learned a lot insofar as making sure that, health and safety are coming first. As you know, with the cruise ships battling to make vaccination a priority to get on the ships. But it's still a fragile area. We still need to do all we can do. And it's a wonderful time to make sure that as we move forward, we put resiliency front and center as part of our plan and our tool in our toolbox to move forward in the future.
Good. Thanks very much, Chris. Maybe a question for all of you, and Christian, we'll start with you. We talk often